Каждый из нас работает на каком-либо проекте, даже если в данный момент...
Let's start. Each of us is working at a certain project. If not now, I'm sure you had certain projects in the past and will have in the future, and you will have many projects. All the projects are different. Over 10 years of my work experience in the field of testing, I worked with different teams, with different technologies and processes within the team and regulations that had to be observed. Usually, we come to the project when there is already established process. If this is a long-lasting one, clearly there is a lot of bureaucracy around it, and the people in the team say, okay, that's the way we do. Who decided to do that way? It's absolutely unknown, but imagine that you join the project from scratch. There's still nothing. It's a greenfield project, and you are responsible for the testing of the new product and for building the test process from scratch. The question is how to build the test process and how to explain the rationale for the customers who have no experience in testing at all and who have no idea what the industry is. My name is Maxime. I am a leader of one of the testing department in a company iTech Art Group. Over the last 3 years, I'm responsible for their new project startup. At the beginning, it was very stressful. I remember that 3 years ago, when I started my first project, my manager told me, hey, listen, we have a potential customer. Do some kind of a plan and we'll start the project on Monday. But I never started a project from scratch myself. So I started to think, I started shaking. They're shaking even now. My hands started to shake. But then I took a deep breath. I imagined and I evaluated the scope of works that have to be performed, and I realized that there is nothing complicated in this. I developed a strategy how to start a project. It took me 3 days to develop this strategy, and I'm still using it over the last 3 years. It proved to be successful for the start of other projects over the last 10 days. I'll tell you about this strategy. It's quite simple. First day is devoted to the analysis of requirements to documentation. Day number 2 is devoted to proposal development. I'll tell you later what proposal is, what it includes. Day number 3, finalize our work and make conclusions. I will use that first project as an example. And if we right now take any kind of project and analyze it in detail, you will have a project to start. I'll promise it won't take more time than planned. Initially, I want to show you based on this app what wonderful design we had, something, but it's not honest. At the beginning, we have no understanding and no idea what the product will be like. Everything might change 10 times during the project implementation. In the beginning, we have something in the gray, something that we will have to restore in our memory over the last 3 days. So we start from day 1, requirements analysis. We collect project documentation. It's important to understand that the requirements on the first days is not yet detailed documentation. These are not tickets in Jira because there is no Jira. Very often it's just a high-level description which is being stored partly in documentation, partly in emails, and partly in the correspondence through Skype. Your task is to collect everything you could. Even you were not part of the customer communication initially, please establish the contact with the person who communicated with the customer and then ask him to write with the screenshot of their correspondences, because sometimes any unimportant or similar unimportant phrase of a customer may change the whole project. Initially, we thought that we will be working for the beauty salons that will be providing services of a manicurist and nail design and other stuff. And then we were just asked the question, who will be structuring the taxes and all the technical details? The customer told us, oh, don't worry, that will be covered by the admin. And then we started to ask the questions, and the scope of the work for the project increased 2 times. That's why I collect everything. Based on the collected documentation, we create website maps. This is a kind of scheme of their website pages, which the user browses to perform certain actions. I suggest that you create separate cards for each kind of users. Thus, you will distinguish between the website elements. Later, if you decide to refuse to use something, you may just simply postpone the design for the admin part for later and select only what you will be including in your scope. Based on the sitemap, we create the features, what we're going to do, that will be needed to estimate the scope of works ahead of us. Also, we create a list of general questions. I mean exactly general questions, because sometimes the testers like to ask very specific ones. For example, what color should the button be? This all is not needed at the start of the project. We need to receive a minimal scope of requirements. Based on the scope, we might evaluate how much time and efforts and resources it will take. There's only one rule: we never try to guess. If we don't know something, we simply write it down as a question. If we don't get an answer, we highlight red in our documentation as to be defined. You ask me why so? If you make an attempt to guess what the customer meant by a certain feature, you stand minimal chances to guess correctly. However, it could be a disaster if you made a mistake in your guesses. That's why we never guess. We rely upon facts. After this, you come up with the list of general questions that must be sent to the customer. I propose that you schedule a meeting for a discussion. If your customer prefers communicating via emails, it might take longer for communication, but it all depends on your preferences. If you do everything correctly, then by the end of day one, you have understanding what app you're going to have, what you're going to test, and what has to be done during day two when we're discussing proposal. A proposal is a document, quotation, which you send the customer and tell him, okay, based on this document, we are going to test your product. We are going to perform various kinds of tests. We are going to compile certain documentation. In the end, you will see a clear result. This is a very important document for the customer, especially if the customer is not aware of what testing is, but it will help to make the testing transparent. During day two, we are going to create a draft proposal for the MVP. MVP is the minimum viable product, if you don't know what abbreviation means, or calling it the other way around is stage one. MVP is needed because if the customer decides to launch the second Facebook page or a second Instagram and you will do it for the first 5 years, the customer doesn't give any. It's not important for the customer. But our market is very competitive, and it's important for the customer to enter the market at least with the minimum developed version. Also, add to the proposal areas to be defined. Then we select the minimum set for project startup and a mandatory discussion within the team. All people understand very well the importance of the three items, but somehow ignore number four. It's essential that you all understand that you are working in the team. You are not going to work alone. It's important to discuss, to listen to others' opinion. Maybe somebody has different point of view, somebody has a relevant opinion. And after you have come up with the common solution, finalize your proposal. Let's now make a proposal. I remind you that we were going to have a proposal for the beauty industry. A problem that we faced was that our customers should be well aware of what the target audience is. It was the central New York, it was the Hell's Kitchen, which is Manhattan. But they had no idea about IT, they had no idea what limitations in IT technologies use, and they trusted us. One of the potential options that we might implement more than one roles, but we decided to follow that we have to develop a quotation with the responsive design which could easily adapt in the browser to mobile phones, mobile devices and tablets. As part of the testing, I proposed them to perform the functional testing. Some people are surprised that the functional testing could be split into certain types, and we proposed role-based and scenario-based testings. So for us, it was essential to test the user flow. Also, there are boundary values. Boundary evaluation is more a technique rather than a separate kind of testing. But since beauty industry's users tend to press something wrong in the app or do something that you would have never guessed the person could have done, it's critically important to validate all forms and functionalities. That's why boundary values have become a kind of the full-scale testing. GUI testing is essential. The interface should be beautiful, and since we work for the beauty sector, for beauty industry, it was supposed to look gorgeous because the visual bugs were more important than the functional ones in this particular case. Cross-browser and cross-platform testing. In this case, we had to perform at least minimum testing. Also, we include API testing and integration end-to-end testing. It's not necessarily integration with our backend. Sometimes it's just the authorization via Google, authorization via Google Maps, various payment systems, and project integration. But initially, we made a list. Another option which we propose is to use mobile or native applications. The similar set of tests procedures were proposed. In addition, we added installation testing and test of interruptions. Connection testing, interruption testings. Also, we very often include push notifications testing. My advice to you when selecting test techniques for a project is very simple. Start with the minimum and extend it with time. I've told you before, often the customers would like to enter the market with a product as fast as possible because they are limited in time, they're limited in budget, and you have to start with the minimum set of requirements that will make sure that the app is viable. Practice suggests that 4 or 5 types of testing is more than enough at the beginning. Nothing prevents you from adding changes into sprints at later stages and reached some new stages. You may later even add exploratory testing, automation testing, and other favorite ones. This is the proposed set, and we started to move forward. In addition, you could understand you have to develop the workflow testing, and you can say actually more about this, but I can give just some more advice. Do this workflow as simple as possible. Don't propose the customer 10 environmental production, a million of cycles. We proposed just the simplest solution: QA environment, production environment, reverse regression. Then we do the test, hand it over to production, and after production we do the regression check. If you see that this project has to become more complicated, there is nothing that prevents you from adding further changes. Next part of our proposal is selecting test documentation. I won't go into detail what a test case or a checklist is. I'll just provide you with some simple advice, which I use every day, starting a project from scratch. While choosing between checklist and case cases, please remember that there is more than that. There are user cases, there's matrix, the list is quite long. You can develop for yourself a kind of a matrix of all test documentation, write down all the advantages and disadvantages, and select the most suitable tool for your project. Very often checklists are not detailed enough. They do not allow to make a cover, make a transfer, and test everything, especially when the project is complicated in terms of the business logic. And the test cases will not work for you because they're too detailed and require too time to get them prepared. So the best would be choose something in the middle. And don't limit yourself to only one set of documentation. You could use various kinds of tests. You could use various kinds of documentation for testing. If you are doing UI testing, write down checklists. After integration testing, write down complex test scenarios and test cases. You are not limited with anything. Use something that is convenient for you and for your team. For each separate kind of testing, you will have a package of specifically developed documentation. Testing documentation also includes test results reporting. It's important for the customer, and this is not only letters or emails. This helps to become the procedure transparent and includes sometimes words in Jira, metrics. It's important to take this into account. And if you do not consider it, you may be delayed and you won't be able to send a status report to the customer on time. If you're creating a test data, it's not simply login in an app. Sometimes download of video audio is required and it takes time. Sometimes big data loading required, and please consider this. Clearly, test plan should be available, because test proposal shall later be turned into the test plan. It should be formalized, it should be provided with details and include everything they would like to put in the next sprint. Now I've covered everything that touches upon the test documentation. And what comes next is estimation of the whole project. This is a very important project, because when you test a feature, if you made a mistake, it takes time. So, but if you made a mistake only by 10 to 15%, most likely you made a mistake in terms of weeks, sometimes months. But if you forget of being worried and if you evaluate the estimation techniques, then there is nothing new for you. All techniques that you use day by day could be used to estimate the whole project. I won't go into detail about 10 techniques how to estimate the project, because this is a topic for a series of separate presentations. I'll just briefly tell you what techniques I personally use and which of them proved to be most stable. First one, estimation by checklist. At the start of the project, there are no checklists at all. Maybe we'll have none in the future, but we are trying to imagine in our heads or take down notes of all the actions that are to be performed during tests. We can estimate how much time we will need for each check. Then we multiply how many checks we might need. In the end, we will have an approximate estimation figures. This is important because we could split the whole procedure into smaller steps. The second estimation technique is estimation by experience. Estimation by experience, it's not when we just simply wave into the crowd or do the fortune telling. Estimation by experience is when you already had experience in other projects with similar tasks and you can evaluate and you understand how much time it had taken in the past, and you can assess how much time it will take in the future. This is a good technique for estimation because it shows and it brings the best result. Next type of estimation, next technique is the estimation by Pert. You may Google on the internet various ways how to calculate it. Usually we take one pessimistic to one optimistic scenario and four average ones, and then divide it by 6. The formula suggests that among ideal and negative scenarios, the truth is somewhere in the middle. This particular formula gives us a possibility to evaluate how much time we will need in the real life environment. It's important to understand that you won't have thousands of bugs and 5 years for one feature for login development. Limit yourself, try to imagine more adequate scenario, and I suggest that you combine several methodologies. Don't limit yourselves to something particular. If you like estimation by checklist, use it. If you like estimation by experience, use it. You may estimate all your activities by these three proposed techniques and compare the results achieved. If you see that they are more or less the same, then your estimation is more or less correct. If there is a huge gap between all three estimation techniques twice and reassess what your estimations are. I'm sure each of you has their own estimation techniques, but for some reasons they may not fit to your product. But please don't be scared. Think logically and check if you really did everything correctly. There is the classical estimation development when we understand that each test activity should take 20 times more than development. In my previous we had 12 testers and 9 developers. Developers had to testing would have to spend much more time than developing. In developing process, we had to change one line in the code, and that was enough. But for the testers, not. The classical formula, unfortunately, worked in our case. We had to think more. We had to decompose, and we realized that only changed the formula based on our needs. After we have done the estimation of all activities, such as functional, non-functional testing, documentation, bug log creation, it's important that we understand whether our estimations are relevant or not. Then we have to set up the criteria for good and bad estimation. Number one, each figure has a rationale. The customer doesn't understand where your figures come from, and if he doesn't understand, he will feel rejection. That's why if you estimated the project as the 3 months project duration, you have to clearly assess and inform the customer why these 3 months are needed and what kind of things are going to be done. Then try to decompose this term in as detailed way as possible and assign values for each activity. Because if you imagine that, okay, you think that it might take 5 months to reduce something, to change something, then you'll have to sit down and calculate again. But if you evaluated each of the fields, each of the points in detail, it won't take you much time. It won't cost you a lot of effort if you make your estimation in an Excel sheet. Good assessment should comply with the customer's vision and deadlines. For instance, your customer would like to enter the market within 3 months' time, but you evaluated it as a 5 years duration project. Of course, the customer will tell you to bugger off. Then, if the customer wants to have the plan to be done within 3 months, you tell the customer what you can really do within 3 months. The customer may accept, may agree, or may not. He may increase the time from 3 months until 4 months, because 3 months is an absolutely unrealistic period. But your evaluation should clearly be considered by the customer.
Based on facts, not assumptions. Remember those red highlighted things. We don't try to guess. We simply write TBD, to be determined, and we cannot estimate it ourselves. So our estimation looks solid. So what do we do with the hours that we received? We turn them into the work plan. One working day can be 6, 7, or 8 hours. If it's 8 hours, we will be doing tests for 8 hours. Plus, we need time set aside for meetings. We convert hours into days, and those days can be converted into months. When it comes to hour to day conversion, no problems. But when you convert days into months, for some reason you believe that one working month includes 30 days. In fact, it's 22 working days, and it can mess things up. After that, we try to plot a graph. Let's say development 60 days, testing 30 days. We take two developers, one tester, and they work hand in hand to design your product. If there is an uneven distribution 65-35, then testers may join later. When the first build has been designed, testers jump in without having to wait during initial stages. That's all, and don't be surprised if your estimation is the same as in the development. Apps and tools for testing. You will not have the privilege of testing management tools. The customers will do that. Maybe your managers already have a preset tools. I'm going to tell you by experience what problems I ran into. In terms of bug tracking, I like Gina. I always offered that to everybody else. I think it will be suitable for any project. The customers didn't know what Jira is. It's a cool tool, and when I was about to make a presentation about Jira to one company, I was told that they use Pivotal Tracker, even though Pivotal Tracker is dwarfed by Jira's advantages. What I'm trying to say that if your customer already has a bug tracker, most likely they will use it and they will reject whatever you has to offer. Most likely you will have to use their bug tracker of preference. If no such thing, then you are free to suggest any alternative. When it comes to test case management, I had the same problem. I wanted to use a pretty cool tool. We wanted to use Google Docs first because the project was limited in terms of budget. It was an awesome tool that you could start writing tests immediately. But then the customer asked me, why don't you use a special dedicated tool for testing and instead use Google Sheets that are not customized and are most likely for kids. So we had to do the test rail and to show benefits of it to the customer. So always check with the customer if they have any visions. Always have a choice to offer so that they would pick something. You can also use any alternatives that you like. If this is a limited budget project, it is always important to remember that one bug can lead to a complete destruction if it's free software that has been used. We can also include other useful tools, and it can be handy for you because you will plan out receiving text messages to an SMS in New York only, or you have to activate bank cards in test mode. All of that will affect the project budget. That's all as far as tools are concerned. Let's go over proposal one more time. It includes scope testing. It's important to highlight features that we are not going to test because the customer decided to decline those, and it has to be properly recorded. Project assumptions and risks. I don't have to explain what those risks are and what mitigation measures can be used. Types of testing, check. Test documentation, check. Estimation of all activities and evaluation criteria, check. We use different formulas here. And testing environment is an environment that and a workflow that you will use. And success criteria is a standard section with trivial bugs, major bugs, and so on. This is the specimen table of contents resulting from this project. As you can see, there is a perfect match between what I told you and what we have. Day 3 is about finalization. Just a little bit left. We send proposal to our customer. This is a specimen example, specimen document with decomposition. We allow some time for review, and this is out of your hand. The customer can come back in an hour with a bunch of questions, or a day later, or a week later, or the customer may never respond. This is perfectly normal. Nothing we can do about it. All we can do is drive at conclusions to see what went sideways, where did we fail. Then we discuss an action plan with the customer with slots for meetings to be able to answer questions by the customer and present yourself as a good expert who is on top of things, very knowledgeable, and we need to have contingency planning as well. Be prepared for any possible changes. All changes are to be edited in the proposal. And then we finalize the product. Like 3 years ago, everything worked out. We lured new customer. Money starts falling from the sky. You can go to a Pacific island for vacation. But there is one but here. The work is only starting. Customers can change user story every day. You are going to have to face 50 instead of 10 bucks. If you worked in Agile or any other environment, most likely you have encountered all of these things. So you will have regular working days trying to improve the product. Important thing is to know when to draw the line. Now, as I stand here 3 years later, I can tell you that a 3-day strategy that I proposed works for any project. That applies to wedding dress salons or beauty parlors, and proceeded to cover investment and business. I think it would also work for military support dimension. When we say we start a project, everybody thinks that this is a startup, but this is not necessarily so. Perhaps testing hasn't been done in a satisfactory way. Even if you don't work as an outsourced company, the same applies to you, except for some specificities when it comes to communication with the customer. I hope that the estimation technique and the technique to start a project will work for you as well, and you will have more than few successful starts. Thank you for your attention. Questions? Thank you for your talk. One question. You talked about mismatch between your plan and the customer's vision. You said that you deliver a set of reports, but what about preliminary DAM? I mean, splitting into certain iterations so the customers would see what you've accomplished thus far, and the customer will see what you did and how it looks. No problem. If the customer has a certain vision, we will accommodate requirements. If customers want to be reported upon once a week, or even every day, or those who want a demonstration, that's fine. But we need to make sure that it is transparent for both your team and the customer. Thank you, Maxime, for your presentation. In your proposal, you mention test design techniques plus test documentation. What's the profit for the customer in this? I mean, what's the benefit of it? What's the value? I mean, companies engaged in business are not interested in development. In fact, some customers are okay with just a nod saying that we are ready for release. But others are more knowledgeable and maybe they want to lose you. I mean, they want to get rid of you. They want to know what they will be stuck with. And then they will be able to pick up another company to do testing. And it's important to say that we never say that we've gotten rid of 100% bugs. And second question about estimation of developers and QAs. Do you do a joint session or separate sessions? It depends. First, we get together in a chat to go over some general items. And then we can see how we are doing. For example, I like to follow real-time developers in a tab. So I recommend that we share the results and discuss those results in joint meetings. Good evening. Thank you for your report. Let's say customer approved your report, but then you realize that you don't meet the indicators because of oversight on your part. How do you go about that? This is where we were wide of the target because we didn't realize how many bugs banks might have. First, if you realize that you screwed up, don't try to hide it. Immediately notify the customer. Let them know that you need an extra day or something. Don't try to put the fault on other payment systems. And it's not enough to mention an error, but also to suggest ways to rectify the error that you found. Thank you for an interesting presentation, Maxime. When do you think is the best time to implement automated testing in a startup? And how it is costly to justify development of auto tests to the customer? Morally costly? I mean, it's priceless. To justify that automation is required can be as complex or as simple as it gets. For example, one of the recent customers said, we want everything automated. I push one button and there we go. I mean, it's important to explain pros and cons. But in phase one, it makes no sense to introduce automation because we don't have product upon which to test automation. And the customer will see results as often, so all the money that we have at disposal will not reap any reward. Again, it's contingent upon your customer's requirements. It's important to build a case.